Margaret knew the power of silence. Sitting at her granddaughter's wedding, she overheard a conversation about who was the real glue of the family. Some swore it was her, while others dismissed her as just a sweet old lady who didn't know much. She smiled, sipped her champagne, and said nothing, because sometimes the smartest person in the room is the one who plays dumb. There's an art to knowing when to step back, let others think they have the upper hand, and quietly navigate life's twists. And if you've lived long enough, you already know. Wisdom isn't about proving you're right. It's about knowing when to let things slide. 1. When people assume you'll handle everything. Margaret used to be the go-to person for everything. Organizing the family reunion? Margaret will do it. Planning her book club's next meeting? Margaret's got it covered. Baking 3 dozen cookies for the church fundraiser? Of course Margaret can whip them up overnight. It wasn't that she didn't love helping, it's that somewhere along the way, people stopped asking and started expecting. One day, she realized she was exhausted. Sitting at her kitchen table, staring at yet another, "Margaret, can you help with this?" text, she took a deep breath and replied, "Oh dear, I wouldn't even know where to start." That was it. No explanation, no justification. Just a simple, polite evasion. And guess what? The world didn't fall apart. The event got organized, the book club picked a location, and someone else baked the cookies. Margaret still smiled, still showed up, still offered advice when asked. But she was no longer the default helper. Why does this work? Because people are often looking for the easiest solution. If you seem confused or unsure, they'll move on to someone who looks more confident. Next time you feel yourself being roped into yet another responsibility you never agreed to, try this. Take a long pause, widen your eyes slightly, and say, "Oh, I wouldn't even know where to begin with that." The magic of playing dumb is that it gives you back your time and energy without confrontation or guilt. 2. When younger family members try to shift burdens onto you. Margaret adored her daughter, but there was one little issue. Every time her daughter had something inconvenient to do, she turned to Margaret with a sweet smile and a, "Mom, you're retired, right? You have time for this." At first, Margaret said yes without hesitation. She loved spending time with her grandkids, running errands, and helping out. But soon, it became expected. The day it clicked for Margaret was when her daughter dropped off the kids and said, "Oh, they need lunch, but you'll figure it out." Figure it out? She hadn't even asked. That's when Margaret played dumb. She chuckled softly and said, "Oh, honey, I wouldn't even know how to make a meal kids like these days. Everything's gluten-free, dairy-free, and organic. I'd probably give them something they won't even eat." Her daughter blinked. "Oh. Well, I can pack them something next time." And just like that, the invisible expectation shifted. When people assume you're an endless well of free time, gently feigning a lack of expertise or confidence in handling their needs makes them rethink their approach. It doesn't have to be confrontational, just act as if the modern world has passed you by a little. They'll quickly find an alternative. Try this next time someone expects you to take on something that isn't your responsibility. Look slightly puzzled, shake your head, and say, "Oh, I wouldn't even know how to do that properly." It keeps things light, yet effectively puts the ball back in their court. 3. When someone tries to make you the problem solver. Margaret loved her friends, but there was one thing that drained her: being caught in the middle of their never-ending squabbles. It always started the same way. 2 friends would be at odds, and instead of resolving their issues like adults, they'd drag Margaret into it. "Margaret, you have such a way with words. Can you just talk to her for me?" Or, "You always know what's fair. What do you think?" For years, she played mediator, smoothing over conflicts, soothing egos, and making peace. But the more she did it, the more it happened. She wasn't a friend anymore. She was a referee. One afternoon, as 2 of her friends sat across from her, arms crossed in frustration, waiting for Margaret to deliver a verdict on who was right, she took a deep breath and smiled. Oh, ladies, I wouldn't even know what to say about this. They stared at her. What do you mean? You always have good advice. Margaret shrugged, tilting her head thoughtfully. Oh, I never understand these kinds of things. People are so complicated, aren't they? Silence. The two women glanced at each other. Then, slowly, they started talking to each other instead of through Margaret. And just like that, Margaret was free. Why does this work? Because people often push responsibility onto others out of habit, not malice. If you always step in, they'll always rely on you. But the moment you become a little less certain, a little less involved, they'll take back ownership of their own issues. Try this next time someone drags you into unnecessary drama. Smile gently, shake your head, and say, "Oh, I wouldn't even know what to say about that." Let them work it out themselves while you sip your tea in peace. Or, when salespeople assume you don't know better. Margaret stepped into the car dealership with a plan. She had researched prices, checked reviews, and knew exactly what she wanted. But the moment she walked in, the salesman's grin widened, his voice took on that slow, overly polite tone, and he gestured her toward the affordable and simple models, speaking as if she were a child. Now, this one is great for seniors, no complicated technology, just an easy ride. Oh, if only he knew. But instead of showing her hand, Margaret blinked, tilting her head slightly. Oh, I wouldn't even know how to tell the difference. What makes this one so special? The salesman puffed up, eager to prove his knowledge, launching into a long-winded explanation. Margaret nodded along, waiting, and then, just at the right moment, she dropped the question that unraveled his entire pitch. Interesting? But isn't this the model that had transmission issues last year? Silence, a nervous chuckle, a fumbled response. Margaret let the pause stretch just long enough before smiling. Oh dear, I suppose I do know a little something after all. She walked out with the car she wanted at a much better price. Here's the truth. People underestimate you all the time. Let them. When a salesperson assumes you're uninformed, don't argue. Lean into it. Let them talk. Let them reveal everything. And then, when they least expect it, show them just how much you know. Next time someone tries to pull one over on you, act a little unsure. Ask seemingly innocent questions. Let them believe they have the upper hand. And then, when the moment is right, watch how quickly the dynamic shifts. Because playing dumb, it's not just about dodging responsibility, it's about strategy. 5. When someone tries to explain things you already know. Margaret had been using computers for years. She sent emails, edited photos, and even did online banking. But when her grandson came over and saw her struggling to reset a password, he sighed dramatically. "Grandma, it's okay. I'll just do it for you. You probably don't understand how all this works." Margaret could have corrected him right then and there. She could have told him she had been navigating technology long before he was born. But instead, she smiled sweetly and let him type away. 5 minutes later, he frowned. "Wait, this isn't working. Why won't it let me reset it?" Margaret leaned over. "Oh dear, I wouldn't even know. But did you check the secondary authentication method?" Her grandson's eyes widened. "How did you know about that?" She shrugged. "Oh, I pick up little things here and there." And just like that, the dynamic shifted. There's a special kind of satisfaction in letting people believe they know more than you until they don't. It's not about embarrassing them. It's about letting them realize that wisdom comes in many forms. So the next time someone talks down to you, don't argue. Let them underestimate you. Let them believe they're the expert. And then at just the right moment, say something that makes them rethink everything they assumed. Because sometimes the best way to prove what you know is to act like you don't. 6. When it helps you gather more information. Margaret had a little rule in life. People will tell you everything. If you let them believe, you don't know a thing. At a neighborhood coffee shop, she overheard a group of younger women chatting about a new city policy that might impact property taxes. She leaned in, curious. One of them turned to her, smiling. "Oh, don't worry, Margaret. It's all a bit complicated." Margaret gasped slightly. "Oh my, I wouldn't even know where to begin understanding all that." And just like that, they started explaining. They didn't hold back, they spoke freely, sharing details she wouldn't have gotten if she had jumped in claiming she already knew. By the time they finished, Margaret had everything she needed to look into the issue properly. Why does this work? Because people love feeling like the expert. When they think you don't know something, they'll often give you more information than if you'd asked directly. So next time you need the inside scoop, play along. Ask questions that invite explanation. Let them fill in the blanks for you, because the more they talk, the more you learn. 7. When someone tries to bait you into an argument. Margaret had been through enough in life to know one simple truth. Not every battle is worth fighting. At family gatherings, she always braced herself for one particular person, her cousin Ted. Ted loved nothing more than stirring the pot, throwing out controversial opinions, than sitting back and watching the fireworks. And every time, someone took the bait. One Thanksgiving, Ted leaned across the table and smirked. "Margaret, don't you think people our age are just stuck in the past? The world has moved on, but old folks just don't get it." The old Margaret would have squared her shoulders, armed herself with logic, and marched straight into the debate. But this Margaret, the one who had learned the art of playing dumb, she just smiled. "Oh, I don't follow that kind of thing too closely," she said, gently swirling the gravy onto her mashed potatoes. Ted blinked. "Come on, you must have an opinion." Margaret shrugged, her face the picture of sweet confusion. "Oh dear, I wouldn't even know where to start with all that." And just like that, Ted lost interest. He turned to someone else, hunting for a new target. Here's the thing. Some people aren't looking for a conversation. They're looking for a reaction. When you play dumb, you rob them of the satisfaction. You stay in control. So the next time someone tries to pull you into an argument you don't want, don't engage. Just tilt your head, give a slow, easy smile, and let the words slip out. "Oh, I wouldn't even know about all that." Watch how quickly they move on. Because wisdom isn't always about proving you're right. Sometimes it's about knowing when silence wins. 8. When people try to pry into your personal life. Margaret had always been a private person. Not secretive, just selective about who got to know the deeper details of her life. But for some reason, people took her quietness as an invitation to dig. At a neighborhood luncheon, a well-meaning but nosy acquaintance leaned in conspiratorially. "Margaret, you never talk about dating. Is there someone special? Come on, spill the details." Margaret smiled politely and took a sip of her tea. "Oh, goodness, I wouldn't even know what to say about that." The woman's eyes gleamed with curiosity. "Oh, so there is someone." Margaret let out a little laugh, shaking her head. "Oh dear, at my age I can barely remember what I had for breakfast." "Romance? Oh, that's all too complicated for me." And just like that, the conversation veered off course. Someone else jumped in with their romantic woes, and Margaret was free. Here's the trick. Curious people don't stop being curious, but they do lose interest when there's no reward. If you've ever been cornered with prying questions about your finances, your health, your love life, you don't have to answer. Just smile, play a little forgetful, and let the conversation slip away. Because the best way to keep your privacy, let them think there's nothing to know. 9. When a confrontation just isn't worth it. Margaret sat across from an old friend, listening as she recounted a story that Margaret knew for a fact wasn't true. They had both been there. They had both lived that moment. And yet, here her friend was, retelling it in a way that painted herself as the hero. adjusting details as if Margaret didn't remember. Margaret could have corrected her, could have said, "Actually, that's not what happened." But instead, she just gave a soft smile and nodded. "Oh, is that how it went? My memory's never as sharp as yours." Her friend beamed, pleased to be seen as the one with the better recall. Margaret sipped her tea, unfazed. Here's the thing. Not every mistake needs correcting. Not every falsehood needs a fight. When someone misremembers, exaggerates, or tells a harmless lie, ask yourself, does it matter? Will correcting them change anything? Will it bring peace or just friction? If it's a small thing, something that doesn't hurt anyone, sometimes it's better to smile, nod, and let it be. Because wisdom isn't just about knowing when to speak. It's about knowing when to stay silent. And now let's take this even further, because sometimes playing dumb isn't about avoiding conflict. Sometimes it's about quietly gathering all the information you need without anyone realizing it. 10. When eavesdropping can be beneficial. Margaret had always been a keen observer. Over the years, she had learned that the best way to know what's happening isn't to ask, it's to listen. One afternoon, she sat quietly at the corner table of her favorite cafe, sipping a cappuccino and flipping through a book. A group of younger women at the next table chatted loudly about a city project that could affect local homeowners. Something Margaret had been struggling to find details about. She didn't interrupt. She didn't ask questions. She simply turned a page in her book, tilted her head slightly, and let the conversation flow around her. They're raising property taxes in certain areas, but they haven't announced which ones yet, one woman said. "I heard they're targeting neighborhoods with older residents first," another chimed in. Margaret's eyebrows lifted, but she kept her face neutral. They thought she wasn't paying attention. When they got up to leave, she pulled out her phone, made a note of what she had heard, and later did her research. And just as she suspected, the rumors were true. Now, some might say eavesdropping is rude, but is it really, if the information helps you? People talk freely when they assume no one is listening, and sometimes the smartest thing you can do is let them believe you're just a harmless old lady lost in thought. So next time you find yourself in a situation where important details are being discussed, just sit back, stay quiet, and let the words find their way to you. Because playing dumb, it's a skill. 11. When you want honest opinions. Margaret had learned the hard way, if people think you know too much, they start filtering what they say. Her grandson, for example, he was usually an open book until Margaret started offering advice. Suddenly he clammed up, answering with, "Oh, nothing much," whenever she asked about his life. So she tried a different approach. Instead of pressing him with direct questions, she let him assume she was out of touch. One day, while scrolling through her phone, she casually said, "I don't even understand what half these apps are for these days." Her grandson chuckled. "Oh, Grandma, it's easy. See, this one is for messaging, this one's for dating, and this one..." He stopped mid-sentence, realizing what he had just admitted. His eyes widened. I mean, not that I use the dating one a lot." Margaret smothered a laugh. "Gotcha." By playing dumb, she had done what direct questioning couldn't, gotten an honest glimpse into his world. People are careful when they think you're listening too closely, but when they believe you don't quite get things, they let their guard down. If you want the truth, whether it's about family matters, workplace gossip, or even just understanding what's going on, sometimes it's best to feign a little confusion. Just act like you don't quite follow, and watch as people fill in the blanks for you. Because playing dumb isn't about deception, it's about access. 12. When people are underestimating you. Margaret had a little rule in life. If people want to believe you're helpless, let them. It makes outsmarting them all the more satisfying. She was hiring a handyman to do some small repairs around the house. The moment he saw her, his tone shifted, condescending, overly patient, as if she were a frail old woman who didn't know a wrench from a screwdriver. "Now, don't you worry, ma'am. I'll take care of everything. You just sit back and let the professionals handle it." Margaret nodded sweetly. "Oh, I wouldn't even know where to begin with all these things." He relaxed, assuming she was clueless. Big mistake. As he worked, she watched, carefully, silently. Then, when he handed her an invoice padded with unnecessary charges, she tilted her head and said, "Oh my, this seems much higher than the industry standard. Should I compare this with the state contractor rates before I pay?" His face paled. She knew. Within seconds, he stammered out a discount, knocking the extra fees off. Margaret just smiled. "Oh, imagine that. I do know a little something after all." Here's the thing. People underestimate seniors all the time. Let them, because when the moment comes and they realize they've misjudged you, that's when the real power shift happens. 13. When you don't want to be roped into obligation. Margaret had a neighbor, Linda, who was a master of persuasion. Every time there was a new community project, whether it was organizing a fundraiser, running a book sale, or heading the HOA, somehow Margaret's name always ended up on the volunteer list. She wasn't sure how it happened. She never actually said yes to these commitments, but Linda had a way of cornering her in the grocery aisle, leading with, "Margaret, we just knew you'd be perfect for this," before she even had a chance to protest. And for years, Margaret went along with it until one day she decided she'd had enough. The next time Linda approached her, clipboard in hand, Margaret put on her best puzzled expression. "Oh, I wouldn't even know where to begin with something like that," she said, shaking her head. Linda blinked. "Oh, but it's easy. We just need someone to organize the sign-ups." Margaret furrowed her brow. "Oh dear, that sounds so complicated. I'm afraid I'd just mess it all up." And just like that, Linda moved on to someone else. It turns out people rarely push when they think something will be more work for them. So the next time someone tries to saddle you with an obligation you never asked for, lean into the confusion. Act like the task is far too complicated, because playing dumb, it's the easiest way to keep your calendar blissfully empty. 14. When movement allows you to enjoy the moment. Margaret had always been sharp, too sharp. She could read a room in an instant, catch every whisper, and sense a surprise coming from a mile away. But one day she realized something. Knowing everything wasn't always fun. Her family was throwing her a birthday party, and they weren't exactly subtle about it. Her daughter made mysterious phone calls in the next room. Her grandson kept winking at her. Even her best friend slipped and said, "Can't wait for Saturday," when there was supposedly nothing planned. She could have played along knowingly, but where was the fun in that? So instead, she played dumb. She let them think she had no idea. She gasped in mock surprise when they shouted happy birthday. She widened her eyes when she saw the decorations. She laughed with delight at the unexpected guests. And you know what? It was one of the best birthdays she'd ever had. Because sometimes the best way to enjoy a moment is to pretend you don't see it coming. Life has enough predictable moments. Now and then, let yourself be surprised, even if you already know the ending. 15. When it lets you play the fool and have fun. Margaret was at a wedding when it happened. The music started, the dance floor opened up, and one of the younger guests turned to her with a teasing grin. "Come on, Margaret, show us your moves." Now, Margaret had been dancing longer than these kids had been alive. She knew every step, every beat. But instead of proving herself, she put on a look of pure innocence. "Oh, I wouldn't even know how to dance to this modern music," she said, shaking her head. The young man laughed. "Oh, it's easy. Here, let me show you." And just like that, he started demonstrating twirling, spinning, completely oblivious to what was about to happen. Then, just when he thought she'd be stiff and awkward, Margaret broke into a perfect spin, clapping right on the beat, throwing in a little Charleston just for fun. The entire dance floor erupted in cheers. She had played the fool and then stolen the show. Because here's the thing, when people expect less from you, the smallest surprises feel like magic. So the next time someone assumes you can't do something, don't correct them right away. Let them think you don't know. Let them teach you. Let them lower the bar. And then blow them away. You know what's better than proving you're the smartest person in the room? Letting people think you're not. Then walking away with all the wins. Less stress, fewer obligations, and a whole lot more fun. So, what do you think? Ready to unleash your inner mastermind and play dumb like a pro? Drop a comment below with the last time you didn't know a thing. Wink, wink. Let's swap notes. I promise I won't tell.